wait a second. I can't just start the video like that. After finishing the editing, I learned more about the development cycle of this game, and I think it's now obvious to me that a lot of the criticism that I expressed towards BioWare might have been unjustified and should have instead been aimed at EA. It's impossible to know exactly how everything was decided, but I just wanted to make sure that I don't come across as too rude with BioWare in the video, and I have definitely changed my mind since making that video. Alright, let's begin. Hey everyone, I'm Muskies, welcome to the channel. I recently played, reviewed, and loved Dragon Age Origins. I had a great time with the game, and Origins is now easily one of my favorite RPGs of all time. Therefore, it was now time to jump into Dragon Age 2, and I really wish that I could sit here and say that the transition from Dragon Age Origins to its sequel was smooth, but unfortunately that would be pretty damn far from the truth. Instead, the game pretty much made me go crazy. I found myself questioning a lot of the changes that BioWare decided to make for the second game, and when you pair that up with the fact that the game got a pretty limited amount of resources and dev time, well, the result is far from perfection. If the game didn't have any redeeming qualities at all, it could have been a complete disaster. But in all honesty, when the credits rolled at the end, I couldn't help but think to myself, that was a pretty damn enjoyable journey overall. A frustrating one in many ways, sure, but it's still a really good game. If it's not clear already, I have some conflicting thoughts about this game and I have a lot to say, so let's dive straight into more of the specific stuff, and I think I want to start with Hawke, the character that we are controlling. Back in Origins, we made our very own character with our own background choice, name, appearance, etc. Now in the sequel, we can still choose the appearance if we want to, but there is also the regular, or I guess intended look for Hawke that we can pick, which is what I went for personally. Now when it comes to Hawke, maybe the change which has the biggest impact is the fact that our character is now fully voiced.
Don't the stories mention my stunning good looks? What about my cunning wit?
Nope, they skip straight to the part about the lovable dwarf with the gorgeous crossbow and the heart of gold.
It wasn't the case at all in Origins, and I'm going to say this a lot in the video, but Origins had a winning recipe, and I was shocked to see all the things that they decided to change anyway. So does that mean that I am against them deciding to have Hawke as the main character and that they decided to voice him? Not really. My only worry is, was it actually necessary? Because I don't think it was. Anyways, beyond how they changed a lot there, I still want to talk about my thoughts on Hawke as a character. I really enjoyed this progression. This game is way shorter than Origins, but they definitely managed to still create a compelling character that basically starts at the bottom after basically being forced away from Lothering and Ferelden, and finally ends up in the city of Kirkwall, where he becomes the champion of that city and also plays a massive role in events that occur later. At first I thought that the voice acting for the character was a bit flat, and I'm not sure if it improved over time or if he just grew on me, but by the end I was really enjoying his personality and just Hawke as a character. He's definitely one of the reasons why I liked this game, and it was bold to make that change, but it's not one that I am furious about, especially not after seeing how it played out in the end. Now, the way dialogue happens in the game is completely changed as they decided to take away the text options from Origins and go with a dialogue wheel, which from what I understand is something BioWare has used in many of their games. I like it. My main gripe with it is that it's usually a very small sample or preview of what will actually be said, and sometimes, yeah, it ends up not really going in the direction I wanted it to, but I think it's still very reasonable and they did a pretty decent job with that. The main problem with the dialogue in general for me though is that I feel like they took away a lot of the depth from dialogue options simply by giving us a smaller amount of options to choose from in most conversations. It's not really a problem related to the dialogue wheel, and it might have to do more with the limited dev time, for example. But overall, I feel like there were a lot more dialogue options and depth in Origins, which is something I wish would not have been reduced in the sequel. Before moving on though, I want to add that I thought that the writing in particular was still very good. It was a clear strength in Origins, and as far as I understand, it's clearly one of BioWare's strengths, and it's something that I've noticed for sure in both games, so it was still very enjoyable in Dragon Age 2 as well. All that leads us to the next topic that I want to cover, the companions. If we ignore the combat for a second, Honestly, I don't have much negative to say here. I think that they mostly kept the recipe intact from Origins, and they did expand on it a little bit. The personal stories for each of the characters felt important and often had a significant impact either on them or the world itself. For example, at some point I kicked my party's main healer, Anders, because he killed a completely innocent mage in front of all of us.
Would you have me leave?
I want nothing more to do with you.
Understood.
I ended up looting a previous save because I really needed him in my party, but the morale of the story is that Dragon Age 2 does not care about you losing some of your companions if it leads to their stories feeling more impactful and just being more important. That's something I can appreciate. For most of the game, I was playing with Varric and Meryl, and then the third member was Bethany at first until she died, and then it was Anders. But yeah, I did most of the companions' quests, and I can't really think of any that were like disappointing when I was doing them. Meryl's one was pretty insane as well, and I think that I definitely trusted her a bit too much, despite some very obvious red flags, which led to the keeper of the Dalish camp having to sacrifice herself to try to stop Meryl, and as a result pretty much the entire tribe decided to try to kill my entire party, so yet another example of how impactful these stories can be. While I did enjoy all the companions, the obvious standout, and I'd be shocked if I'm the only one thinking that, but I thought Varric was a very entertaining companion.
Call me a filthy nug licker once in a while, for pity's sake.
Especially his relationship with Hawke and the banter between the two, it just flowed very nicely, and I also thought that having him telling the story of the game was an interesting concept. Overall, I thought the companions in this game were pretty great, and I think that none of them really impacted me, unfortunately, to the extent that Alistair and Morrigan did in Origins, but, you know, it's two different games. Origins was a very different game overall, but with what they had here in Dragon Age 2, I think that they did a pretty damn good job. Alright, now let's switch to the combat. The combat was pretty enjoyable. I'm not going to lie, I don't play these games for the combat mainly, but I was instantly frustrated when I saw that I couldn't get the overhead camera from Origins. Just why? I got used to how it was in this game pretty quickly, but it is yet another change that feels unnecessary. I'll say that the overall combat feel was way better than in Origins in my opinion, mostly because of better animations and sound effects, making it just very satisfying. But then, when it comes to strategy, I didn't really feel like I needed to strategize as much as I did in Dragon Age Origins. In fact, I don't think I even opened the tactics page once, and I also was rarely switching between the characters compared to what I was doing in Origins, but it's not necessarily all bad. It all felt quicker, more satisfying, and I'll say I like both approaches. Was it necessary for them to change their approach though? Especially after succeeding with the first game and setting the expectations for what Dragon Age is? I don't think so. Anyways, moving on, a big problem with the combat in Dragon Age 2 for me, and it was also present in Origins to a lesser extent, is that I feel like they think that if we go for like 5 minutes without fighting something, we will be bored and drop the game. They'll force encounters on you at every corner, even in the city itself. Not only that, but it's like a wave system where enemies keep appearing out of nowhere in waves, and it's something that I think is overdone a bit, especially when considering the limited variety of enemies that we face in the game. I think that the game would have benefited a lot from them reconsidering the frequency at which we get into fights, especially in places like the city's streets. At first, these encounters do feel pretty good because the combat, like I said, is pretty satisfying, but over time it just gets very repetitive. The best way I can conclude this section on combat is by saying that, in almost every way, I still prefer the combat in Origins except for the animations and the sound design. Now let's talk about the pacing of the game, and it's extremely fast. We go from a place to another very quickly, and we have no time to get bored whatsoever. With Origins, I said that some of the areas could become quite boring because they were very, very big and sometimes it took a long time to make progress. Well, in Dragon Age 2, it's fixed, but like to an extreme extent. The quests are usually very short and moving from objective to objective is very, very quick, which is helped by how easily we can TP from a location to another. It's almost too quick though, but when we consider all of the reused assets, well, they pretty much had to, and yes, of course, we'll talk about the reused assets. Dragon Age 2's most annoying problem is that it keeps reusing the same areas and assets for different quests. Either they'll send you quite literally to the same locations you've already been to, or they'll pretend it's a new place while it in fact just isn't. With the quick pace, it makes this problem a bit less annoying, but it is still very obnoxious, and when compared to Origins, it's pretty depressing to witness all that. Now to talk a bit about the main story. It's quite weird. It took some time for me to fully grasp what was going on and kind of where the game was trying to go, but I think that around Act 2, things really started to become a bit clearer and the rising tensions between the mages and the Templars were starting to become obvious. I really liked this dilemma of having to pick a side. We were constantly witnessing arguments for both sides. Should humans be able to control their magic on their own, or should they be controlled? And if controlled, how much? For a while I was pretty set on helping the mages, and then Hawke's mother died to the hands of a crazy blood mage, and yeah, the game definitely makes you ask yourself many questions, and it's only one example of a situation that makes this decision harder. By the way, talking about death, I thought that the way the game handled the deaths of Bethany and Alejandra was a bit disappointing. We just moved on a bit quickly, and I feel like it didn't really have as much of an impact as it probably should have. I guess for Bethany I can kind of understand, since her fate depends on player choice, so I guess it makes more sense.
My little boy has become so strong. I love you. You've always made me so proud.
Back on main topic, the structure and nature of the main story is very impacted by the decision to spend pretty much the entire game in Kirkwall, of course, and I think that they handled pretty well all of the various factions and various people in the city to create a pretty intense political structure that definitely evolves throughout the game, with of course the mages and Templars, but also the Kunaris and even the Viscount of Kirkwall. I'm not a huge fan of being stuck in Kirkwall for the entire game, but they did manage to create interesting political situations, that's clear. From the perspective of our character, interacting with all of that definitely led to some difficult choices, and yeah, I guess Kirkwall is just a messed up place overall. I think that the main story never really reaches the epicness of Origins, which has this crazy plot developing over time with a very clear goal from the beginning. Here it's very different. It's a mix of just surviving in Kirkwall, making a name for yourself, getting money, and slowly rising ranks to ultimately be an important figure in this massive clash between Meredith and Orsino. I won't dive too deep into the decision-making process in this video, but I ultimately sided with the mages, and I'm pretty glad I did, especially after it was revealed that Meredith had in her possession the corrupted lyrium idol that Bartrand found in the Deep Roads.
I won't let her slaughter all of you.
Before moving on to another topic, once again I'll say it's not as epic as Origins. It was still very good, and I hate that I always have to compare it to Origins. I wish I didn't have to, but Origins was so good. It's the sequel. It obviously is going to be compared to it a lot, and honestly, in a lot of areas, it just pales in comparison. It doesn't mean that it's a bad game, but the comparison is I have to make it. Now, if we talk a bit about the graphics, it almost looks the same as Origins. It could have been an expansion to Origins, and I probably wouldn't have noticed. So overall, it was almost the same, but it did feel to me like the overall art direction was a little bit less gory and dark, but it was still very similar, and I definitely enjoyed how both games looked. As I talked about earlier though, this game obviously gets pretty repetitive visually, but it has nothing to do with the design of the areas, and I think that the game looks dated for sure, but it still looks good in my opinion. My closing thoughts on Dragon Age 2 are that a lot of the changes that they decided to do are very difficult to understand, and I think that they didn't necessarily understand very well the things that Origins lovers actually enjoyed. Dragon Age 2 on its own is a solid game, mostly because of good narrative moments and just how compelling Hawke and some of the characters end up being. Following my experience with Origins though, I simply cannot understand the decision to limit us to the city of Kirkwall and the surrounding area. It doesn't really utilize the beautiful world of Dragon Age to its full potential, and it's a decision that I'm just not a fan of. In almost every ways, this game just feels shallower than Origins, even with basic stuff like the game's soundtrack or the locations. It's just less memorable, and it's a bit sad honestly. If they kept the scope and recipe of Origins and managed to expand on it, this truly could have been one of the best video games ever created, and I do believe that. Instead, we have a really good game. That's not too bad, hey. And I even think that, I have to say this, I even think that with all the departures that they decided to do from Origins, I still think that Dragon Age 2 could have been a great game. It only needed to spend, I think, a little bit more time in the oven and just have a little bit more work put into it. Make sure to let me know your own thoughts on Dragon Age 2 in the comments. I realize that it's a fairly divisive game, and I'd definitely be interested to see what y'all think about it. I'm looking forward to Inquisition now, which will probably take a while, as according to almost every places I've looked so far, it appears to be the longest of the 3 games, which is something that I'm excited for after a pretty short second game. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed. I'll see y'all soon in the next one. Bye bye.